Today is Tuesday, February 26, 2013. I'm Matthew T.G.
I'm Heath Mulligan.
And I'm Tony Casey. Welcome to the Techology Show, a weekly podcast featuring technology, theology, and everything in between. This is episode 192.
Man, we keep getting closer and closer to that historic day. I think, what is it, April 23rd? Put it on your calendar. Let me look here.
No, it's sooner than that. Is it the 23rd?
It's April 23rd.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Our 200th episode.
I canceled a meeting with the president to be here.
So a couple things happened really quickly right before we began the show today. First of all, we were a little bit late, and we were told that that some people pay good money for this podcast, and we just want to remind you we have not received your payment. So please get that in the mail.
Somewhere, someone else is getting our payment. So
and I don't know what the mail service is like in Minnesota, but apparently.
And not just that, but Dennis moved his camera. Our guest today moved his camera right as he got into the show, and now we see over his left shoulder a Star Wars Episode 1. It must be a Jar Jar Binks action figure, which speaks a lot about...
No, that's Obi-Wan.
It's Ewan McGregor. Okay.
The respect level for this man has just gone up a notch.
He just got instant cred with some of the viewers right there.
Yeah. Oh, my... Oh! Yes!
Hey, we better introduce our guest.
Yes.
Dr. Dennis Humphrey is a licensed clinical professional counselor with 23 years of experience in the mental health industry. His specialties include counseling related to youth and young adults, marriage health, men's issues, and career and vocational assessment. Dennis has served as pastor, a corporate consultant, and educator. Currently, he runs a private counseling practice and serves as an adjunct faculty at Trinity International University and Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. He and his wife, Heather, live in Schaumburg, Illinois, with their 4 children. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, is that your Star Wars stuff or your kids?
That's my kids' stuff. They're big into that. I got a few Pez's up here. Got a few more Legos.
All right. Yeah. So little honesty there. Thank you, Dennis. We appreciate that. Hey, listen, we had the privilege of hearing you speak a few weeks ago, and we found out that an area of interest for you has become the issue of shame. And talk to us a little bit about, your own evolution with this and your own interest with this whole issue of shame.
Sure. Well, the evolution is both personal and professional. And to be honest with you, probably I learned about it professionally before I dealt with it personally. Back in the 80s when I was in college, I read a book by a gentleman named Bruce Naramore called No Condemnation. And in that work, he starts to talk about guilt, what it is, what it isn't, makes some distinctions, and raises this concept of godly sorrow. And it really resonated with me because it helped me understand what really was guilt. What was when I was feeling guilty, what was I attributing that to? That I'd violated a standard of God, or that I was a rotten person, or there was something wrong with me. And so I understood that. And professionally, as I grew up in the counseling industry, started to see this in people. And, really it wasn't until midlife that I started to really grapple with it with myself. I started to recognize, I've kind of operated out of this unhealthy sense of shame, this unhealthy view of myself, and it's affected a lot of my relationships. And so, it's professionally first and then personally later on. And now that's come back and helped my professional work as well.
Well, as you talk about that, tell us about the difference between shame and guilt.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's so confusing, because the two carry the same types of feelings. And the best way to describe it is this: is guilt, feelings that arise out of guilt, like remorse and sadness and sorrow and the agony of guilt, comes because we violated a standard, something we know to be true and good, and we violated it. Whereas shame, what happens with shame is we violate the standard, but instead of recognizing that, hey, you know what, I just did something wrong, I just violated God's law, I just hurt another person or violated a moral or ethical rule, we say, I did that. Well, that's an indicator of who and what I am. And that tells me how rotten and bad and awful I am. And so it's a matter of direction of where we go when we have this cluster of feelings that are like guilt and embarrassment or, negative thoughts about our behavior.
So would you say, I mean, these, if guilt is not dealt with properly, do these turn into issues of worth then?
Absolutely. The shame piece is, I look at my behavior and I say, this is an indication of my worth and value.
Okay, yeah.
So like, Tony, if I punch you in the nose and give you a bloody nose, I can say, wow, I hurt Tony. Why did I do that? That was wrong of me. That caused him pain. And my grief and my sorrow and the embarrassment I feel and the guilt I feel over that is because what I did hurt you. And I need to figure out why I did that. And now I need to make that right. I need to not do that and figure out how to make that right with you. Whereas if I punch you and I operate out of shame, I say, I punched you. What a rotten, awful person I am. Look at the damage I could. Look what I do. Why would anyone want to live and be with me?
Yeah. It's interesting. You and I, Dennis, had some great conversations when you were here last month, and you gave me language and kind of categories that I hadn't had before. And one of the people in the scripture that you and I talked about was King David. And some years ago, I did a sermon series on him. And, I said that David, while God forgave him, David could never forgive himself. And then as you began to speak, I think I even ran this idea by you that what David seems to be dealing with here are issues of shame, of issues of worth that he never really gets over. I'm pretty close there, don't you think?
I think there's some of that going on with David. It's always a challenge when we kind of look back in, but I think that's true because I think in other parts of the Psalms, you start to see him wrestling with creating a separation between what he's done and who he is. But yeah, there's definitely part of David's life where he's wrestling with shame. He's wrestling with what he did and his identity.
Yeah, give us some practical examples of how shame shows up in a counseling session.
It shows up a lot. One simple example is when people are struggling with things like alcohol addiction or things of that nature, where I start to talk to them about, would you ever tell anybody about this? Oh no, I could never tell anybody about this. This need to hide is an indication. Medication is a big one, especially in the Christian community. I tell people, I say, we're great with medication from here down.
Yeah. But
medication from here up, we typically struggle with because we just think, well, that's somehow awful that I would have to take medication for depression or bipolar or some mental health disease when the science is telling us there is a big chemical aspect. So we've taken these things we call mental illness and we've stigmatized it in the community. And that often comes out when I want to refer someone to a psychiatrist and say, I really think there might be something biological going on here. And the resistance to go see a doctor because, well, if I take medication, I'm just not being good enough. I should be able to get over this on my own. There's this negative identity piece tied to it.
Could you talk about one of the questions out of the chat room is could you talk to the potential of shame being used as an excuse to distance ourselves from the impact of our sin? I mean, and what the person means is dealing with it in a very cold type manner.
If I understand correct, just that our shame would become this thing we hide behind or this thing we tell people to get over.
That seems to be the heart of the question.
Right.
Yeah. The thing, how one deals with shame is not through some clinical cold analysis or reading about it, although it's good to educate ourselves. But to deal with shame, we have to actually feel it in the presence of others. It needs to come up. What did Jesus do? Jesus came to this world. He lived in and among us. He went and he bore the shame of the cross.
Yeah.
He took it on. And what we do with shame is when we have it, we try to hide it. And so how one deals with it actually is in community and in relationship. Yes, we can understand all the nuances and the clinical aspects, but it's sitting with a person who's willing to expose their heart and the awful things about them and saying, you know what? I care for you. I love you. This is not too big for Christ.
Yeah.
You know, he loves you. He bore shame. He's going to help you bear this shame.
Dennis, you heard some of the conversations we had at our pastors' gathering. You raise a huge challenge, though, and that is this, that you would think that in the church we'd be really good at doing this, but it's the exact opposite. I mean, the last thing we want to do is open our chest and let everyone see what's inside.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I mean, so the church should be the opposite. Why do you think that it's so hard in the church to be real with other people?
Well, a couple things. One is just our own sin. You know, what was the first response of Adam and Eve in the garden when they sinned? Was to hide. So our own sinful nature drives us to hide, and we have to start there. Culturally, I think what's happened is in the church we've kind of developed this idea of image and behavior code, and so, you know, what do good Christians look like? What do they do? What don't they do? And we've kind of confused what happens when we sin. It's like it's like the train jumped the tracks. When we sin and we feel a proper guilt for it, you know, the proper response is repentance, confession, forgiveness, enter into the community, receive love and grace and forgiveness. Yeah. But what we do is we've shifted the track, and now the train runs down this, look at this, what a bad Christian I am. If I was a good Christian, I wouldn't do this. And we put this good and bad thing on it. But Christ loves us despite our sin. You know, Christ is obviously in relationship. It affects our relationship, but, you know, we're not on this good bad thing with Christ. Sure. His love is full on to us if the gospel is what we proclaim it to be.
Another thing that struck me, Dennis, when you began to, you said that we're really good with medication from the neck down, but from the neck up we struggle. When you said that, this is exactly where you and I made a connection 5.5 years ago. It was a conversation about this, and I was talking to you from the perspective of a pastor because I had, just in my own pastorate, felt like I was somewhat equipped to deal with these physical issues of the body. But in ministry, mental illness was a huge challenge. Why do you think that is? Why is that such a problem within the church in terms of the church dealing with it?
Well, obviously, you know, there is this shame piece. When people are different, when people don't fit in, they feel shame. And in communities also enhance that at times. You know, we all know people in and around the church who, you know, they just don't quite fit in. They don't socially fit in. They don't relationally fit in. And so when people feel different, they feel shame. And when we start to compound that with, you know, maybe some legalism or behavior code, and we start to get confused with that. And so I've gone on and rambled on. You're going to have to reboot me on the question there.
Well, just this thing, the challenge within ministry to deal with issues of mental illness.
Yeah, I think one of the other things is in pastoral training is a big issue.
No.
You know, I love the seminary. You know, I've taught at the seminary. I love the pastorate. But I think one of the challenges is we balance this. You know, we learn to exegete our scripture, we learn to read it, but they don't always teach pastors to exegete people. So what does it mean with all this scriptural knowledge, all this systematic theology, all this good truth and orthodoxy? How does that get connected to the person in front of me who's in emotional pain? And so I think the training piece there may be a little lacking, and then that kind of spills out. You know, if a pastor's not feeling adequate to deal with it, it's going to be hard for him or her to shepherd his or her people to become adequate in it.
Yeah.
So Dennis, from the context of ministry, What are some of the issues that churches and pastors need to be aware of in the current culture that we're living in regards to all this?
Well, I think one of the things is to recognize that we live in a therapeutic culture, and that it's more and more. We'd like to say a pastor is a frontline person, and they are to an extent, but I think we're starting to shift where people will come to the counselor. And so, one, in a community sense of creating an environment where people who struggle emotionally are welcome is one. We're willing to take on your emotional struggles. We're willing to walk with you in relationship with that. The other is for pastors to recognize that it's really frustrating. You're going to have people come to you, and they're going to be loaded with shame. They're not going to be very equipped, and you may not have all the resources. However, you have the Holy Spirit in you to lead you through and guide you through that. And so on one level, just the pastor being personally ready to walk with people in relationship, learning to develop this sense of community. And I don't mean like programs and things like that, but learning to sit down and be with someone who's going through a difficult time without worrying about having a solution or them saying the right orthodox thing.
Yeah. Dennis, let me ask you this, because this may get into one of the questions that was raised in the chat room. Is I have dealt with individuals who have dealt with guilt and shame and anxiety issues, and because of that are on medication. And it seems like to me a lot of times the medication detaches them emotionally, and they're literally like a zombie. And that was one of the points in our chat room, was how do we help people engage emotionally and really feel the weight of something that they've done, but help them go through that and understand the emotion, that it's not just a black and white issue, but that there is emotion involved in the things that we've done. How do we, I mean, you're right, they did not cover that in my classes, but how do we walk people through that?
Well, number one, on the medication side, I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't speak to that with great authority. But part of the challenge is helping people identify what is there a real biological side to this issue, and there are cases, but medication is never enough to deal with the issue. Even the counseling world, the psychological world says you need to do the medication, then you need to do the counseling. And what do they need there? You need to correct biology if your biology is a problem. And the purpose of biology, the biological part, is to stabilize.
Right.
It's not fix. It's to stabilize. So then one can enter into the counseling, which is what? The relational piece.
Yeah.
And so those two have to go hand in hand. And with shame and grief is an important piece. I think one of the things in the church is we've lost the value of proper grief and proper lament.
Wow.
I like to say this, like grief is the doorway to wholeness in one way. We need to grieve. We need to grieve our sin. We need to feel the weight of our sin. But while we feel the weight of it, we need other people to say there, you're really feeling the weight of this, but let me tell you the good news. This weight that you're feeling is released in your relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
He's going to care for your heart on this. And, I'm going to stand here with you in this difficult moment and be with you. And I'm not afraid of you in this difficult moment. And you know what? That's what we do in counseling. People come to us and they grieve.
Let me ask you this, Dennis. In this whole thing of kind of avoiding grief, is this getting back to the point that you make that we're a therapeutic culture?
In the sense of we're a therapeutic culture in the sense that, we understand we have these feelings and these conflicting passions, and we want to do something with them. Our hearts, I think Tim Keller talks about the soul as this thing that is not this calm, peaceful river or pond. It's this raging ocean that's constantly seeking satisfaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have is, we're constantly always trying to connect in relationship. We want our souls to be satisfied. And that's why we pursue things like addiction and other and relationships that get us all messy. But our soul satisfaction first comes in Christ. And so as believers, when we're working with people who struggle with a lot of shame, this rotten sense of self that's biblically not accurate, what we need to do is to be able to be with them in that rage, that emotional thing, and point them to Christ. But you have to, it's not like an intellectual thing. It's not a cognitive thing. It's not I open my Bible and say, here, read this. This will fix you.
Yeah.
It's being with them and loving them in the emotional turmoil.
It's interesting in when we deal with physical issues in the ministry from a pastor's point of view, we have no trouble in recognizing it as a physical issue and then acting accordingly. But, and if I overstate the case here, jump on me, but it seems like if there are issues, especially related to mental issues, our first knee-jerk reaction is to spiritualize those things. And to say that, well, this is a spiritual problem. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a spiritual dimension to it. I want to be careful here not to talk in absolute terms, but I don't wonder if our knee-jerk reaction there doesn't hinder at times.
Well, it is spiritual. When we're struggling with depression, we are struggling with a spiritual problem.
Okay.
But the question isn't that. The question is how that application is applied and why it's applied and what's the effect of its application. It's like, for instance, extreme case, I could have a rape victim come to me.
Okay.
And she's depressed and things are messy and she's angry at her abuser. And I could say she has a spiritual problem. Well, yeah, she does. I could say that, you're going to need to forgive your abuser. I could be orthodox. I could be true.
Right.
It's not about the what. It's about the how and the process of applying the what.
Very good, yeah.
And so I want to be with her to the point where I gain credibility to say, hey, we've been working for a while. You've processed through your grief. You're getting comfortable with this story. What about your accuser? Your abuser? Do you need to think about forgiving that person?
Yeah, that's good. Because in other words, instead of pointing and saying this is what you have to do,
right.
Here's the process to get you to what you have to do.
I want to be with you all along the way to get to there.
Yeah. So would it help us as pastors to look at counseling as part of making disciples? Like, it's not separate from we're into discipleship, we're into helping people become more like Christ. And really, everything you're telling me, that doing life with people, walking with them, that's really the essence of discipleship.
Yes, because where's our transformation come from? It comes through this relationship with Christ. What he has done is we, by faith, enter into relationship with him. And so that just mirrors everything down. Now, as a pastor, you can't always turn yourself into a counselor. Right. And you got to figure out whether you're good at it or not. And if you're not, then you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to care in this way? What are my limits?
So I want to, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in on a question here real quick. And this kind of takes us a little bit different track, but resources. I know that I saw Seth asking about it in the chat room. I know that during the pastors conference, you just gave a couple great resources, and I remember one of those being a book called Shame Interrupted, which a couple weeks ago I was in Panera Bread, and I didn't go speak to her, but I saw a young lady in her 20s or 30s. She had that book and her ESV study Bible and was writing some sort of report. And I thought, hey, there's the book in the wild that we're talking about, Shame Interrupted. Yeah. But what kind of resources could you give people? Because this, while I'm sure there's a little bit more of this conversation to have, I know that there's interest in continuing to learn and develop ourselves in this regard.
Well, Shame Interrupted, that's by Ed Welch. And that's a good book. It's good in the sense it's going to give you a very comprehensive scriptural view of shame. It's going to help highlight some issues and ask some penetrating questions. So, for people in the congregation, that's a really good tool. Another one for pastors would be Pattinson's shame theory, therapy, theology. If someone wants to kind of get into the history, particularly in that book, at the end, the third section, he starts to talk about how do we deal with this in the church? How do we structure ourselves? He asks some very penetrating questions of the church in dealing with shame. So those two resources are very good. The excuse me, the therapy community is starting to wake up to this. You'll see a lot more out there in the non-Christian environment. Brene Brown is an author that is also writing in this area.
There are some video resources of her out there as well. I mean, I think on YouTube, things of that nature. We were able to find some during the pastors' gathering.
Yeah, her TED Talks, TED Talks.
Yeah.
She has two out there. So she's done a lot of good research. I don't particularly jive with her ultimate answers, but I think she is she's doing some very good articulation on what it looks like to deal with shame.
Well, we will, on all of these resources, they'll be linked in our show notes. And if you're actually saying, hey, listening to this show and saying, hey, I would actually have interest in buying those, they're actually, I'm just going to put it out there, they're going to be affiliate links. And if you buy them by going to our show.
Help the show.
Yeah, you actually help us out. So go check those out after we're done today.
So last question, Dennis, and we've got a chat room full of pastors. A lot of pastors watch this show. You just touched on this a little bit, but what would you say to the pastor who responds to all of this by expressing his or her doubt that they have what it takes to have an effective counseling ministry?
Well, I think the first thing is to say, what do you mean by a counseling ministry? Every pastor that I know of has to do some sort of counseling. And so, if this is not something you're going to do full-time as a pastoral counselor on staff, I think the first thing is to decide what boundaries need to be around it. Looking at your skill level and your knowledge and your schedule and your commitments to everything else in ministry, being able to say, how much of this can I reasonably do and to what depth? And so what I encourage pastors to do is to set some boundaries so they don't get in over their head, so they don't start to deal with issues they're not qualified or skilled to deal with, and to consider that you're not there to do therapy. You're there to minister to the heart. So the big question you always have is, what's going on in this person's heart as I sit with them?
Yeah.
We can look at their behavior and get them to stop doing sinful behavior, and that's good. We need to do that and put right accountabilities. But what we're really trying to do is discern by the power of the Holy Spirit what's going on in the heart. And so, if you can get there and the person is open and the Holy Spirit's convicting a person, you can lead them down there. If you find yourself time and time again hitting a brick wall with the person, and you can't do this all the time, you may need to find some resources to refer, but stay in with them in the pastoral care and the ministry to their heart, their spiritual well-being.
Yeah, well, let me say what you won't say, Dennis, and that is, I mean, to connect with people like you who do this, who have had, from an academic point of view, have prepared for this, experientially have been in ministry, so understand it from that perspective as well, to hook up with people in your community who can serve that purpose.
Yeah, build relationships, not just in the Christian counseling community, but in the social services community.
Very good.
Where there's for people who don't have means and resources, absolutely connect with them.
Part of my problem, Dennis, is a lot of times I don't run into a brick wall with people, but I want to throw people into a brick wall. And I may need some counseling for that, because I don't want to get off topic here. I just get so in trying to help people through this. And I guess it's how God feels with all of us sometimes, but it's like people will come and you give them advice and you give them steps to take, and they just can't. It's like they cannot get out of this rut, this emotional rut, and this rut of not being able to forgive themselves, accept God's forgiveness. And I just want to be like, come on now, let's get it together. Come on.
Sure. And I think when you run into that, that's when you're starting, as a shepherd, you're starting to go, there's a spiritual problem here.
You're right, absolutely.
Part of their heart is locked up.
Mm.
And this is where you as the shepherd want to lead them, even in teaching them how to seek the Lord for this.
Yeah.
Even just calling them out, saying, look, we've been doing this for a while. You know the truth, yet you're still here. Rather than us doing it for them, let's teach them to seek the Lord for the dark corners of their heart.
Oh, wow. That's good.
While we're with them, and lead them out into that.
Yeah, very good. Dennis, if some of our listeners wanted to get in contact with you, how could they do that?
Yeah, I have a very simple website that's under construction right now. It's DennisHumphrey.com. They could link to me on Facebook, or they could email me from there. I'd be glad to entertain any questions if anyone had anything.
All right, and I would say that on our district website, we have some.
Yeah, from the pastors' gathering, the seminars that you did are up there, and if you go to scwesleyan.org, there'll be up there in the banner. It'll just say pastors' gathering. It has an inappropriate apostrophe. I've discovered since then, so ignore my apostrophe. But pastors' gathering, 2013. Click that. All those seminars and sessions are there, and well worth listening to. There's about 4 to 6 hours worth of content there to absorb and take in.
And Dennis, you can't see it, but the chat room is just lighting up this morning. About 15 folks in there, just really excited about what you're talking about, really into what you're talking about, and appreciative of all the things you talked about. So we appreciate that.
All right, Dennis, I think you're just going to hang around with us for the next hour here.
Yep.
I mean, for the remainder of the hour, not the next hour.
I got places to be this afternoon.
So just hang tight there, and I love to say to our guests, this is like us being at Starbucks. We're just throwing out ideas and stuff. So at any time, just chime in there. All right.
Alrighty.
All right, let's keep this thing rolling. Time for
Download of the Week.
Everybody's favorite time of the show, Download of the Week. I've got a free one for you all today to enjoy. How many of you absolutely love getting junk mail? I mean, you go out to the mailbox. You remember as a kid, getting mail was wonderful.
It's the only way I know I'm alive, when I get that.
I hate getting other people's
Getting
junk
mail as a kid is just the best. I mean, you absolutely love it. However, as an adult, when you start just getting random letters and it's just junk and garbage from people trying to sell you stuff or whatever, and sometimes the fonts they use on the cards and stuff that they send looks like somebody's handwritten you something, and then you see up there in that corner pre-sorted mail, and you're like, no, I thought somebody was actually trying to get in contact with me, but they're not. It's actually junk mail. Well, there is an application for iOS and Android devices called Paper Karma, and I'm going to put it up here on the screen. So this is my home screen.
This is fascinating.
Let me fire it up here. So this is Paper Karma. Here we are. And if you get junk mail, you then take this and you click the scan mail button. You take a photo of the piece of mail that you have. So
just take a picture of Heath. That's like junk mail.
I can't. right there. If I had a piece of junk mail, I would do it. But then once that happens, it puts it in there. And they send a request to whoever sent that. So here's my request statuses from the people that have sent me, just informational flyers. And the ones that are
Why does
highlighted
it say
in green.
General Office of the Wesleyan Church?
The ones that are highlighted in green are the ones that have gone through. So here's a piece of mail from AT&T, where AT&T had sent me this flyer, and there it is, zoomed in. You can tell, keep them correct. It's kind of automated, but it pulls that and it sends out those requests. Now, this isn't going to be instantaneous because we are dealing with mail, and some of these places they'll tell you. They say some places have already 2 weeks out have printed this kind of stuff that's going to go out. So it takes a while. But I've been using this since, let's see, I can go back, longer than I thought, back since March of last year. And it has cut down. Like, I don't get stuff from Dish Network anymore. They've quit sending stuff to me. So definitely worthwhile when you come in from the mailbox. Cool. You just separate the junk, take a picture of it, and that's all there is to it. I mean, you have to put your address in, and so I actually have my address and Ashley's address in here too, because when I started noticing is that after it got stopped sending to me, now I got little junk mail for Ashley. So now her name. And as you take that picture, it'll say who's this addressed to, and you got to choose. So if it's Ashley, I've got to choose, my wife's name and the same address and send it. But it has been working and pretty cool. I like it.
And this is on Android as well.
Android. It's in the Google Play Store. It's on iOS. Definitely worth checking out.
Now I know what to do with that mail that Heath sends me. This is great.
Well, is it a sin to sign other people up for junk mail? I've done that before. Like you go to a little show or
That's
something.
bad. That's bad. Oh, man. Oh, good download.
Well, thank you.
All righty. Time for
They
Said It.
All right.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again.
I've never taken steroids or HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
I'm not a crook.
If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
For $169, you'd think they would stack up nicely against Google's $199 Nexus 7. And we hope to find out soon, but at least on paper, it's not completely competitive. Google's tablet may cost $30 more, have one fewer camera and no micro SD slot, but it does have a quad-core Tegra 3 processor inside, boasts GPS, NFC, and more motion sensors, is a touch thinner and lighter, and comes with double the storage capacity at 16 gigabytes.
You thought
Sean Hollister reporting on HP's rumored launch into the Android tablet market with a Slate 7 tablet. Source, The Verge. I said all that as John Calvin was falling once again off the wall.
that was
No,
actually
it was Corey Ten Boom who
Oh.
fell this time. Yeah. All right, here. I really don't understand this because every one of these houses used our parking lot as a staging area to get their lumber. They disturbed us early in the morning and late at night when they were working, and we had something going on at the church, but we never complained about it. Maurice Johnson, pastor of Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church, responding to complaints by new community residents that the worship services are too loud. Source, the Houston Chronicle.
Almost 3 years ago, one of our Macedonian friends told us how long and hard she had to look before she was able to find a Bible in Macedonia. It took her months of looking in Orthodox churches and bookstores. Her problem started us on a journey to find a way to make the Bible available to the Macedonian people in their own language, and almost as equally important to give them a tool to help them read the Bible. Matt Boyer, missionary who partnered with YouVersion to see the November 2012 release of 2 Macedonian Bibles on YouVersion. This is significant because it is free and available to download on computers and phones of almost any kind. In a country with more Facebook and smartphone users per capita than America, the Bible available in Macedonian on YouVersion has the ability to penetrate to almost every other home in Macedonia. Source, Global Partners.
Oh, I had seen my share of Bible verses on placards at gay pride marches. That Christians who mocked me on Gay Pride Day were happy that I and everyone I loved were going to hell was clear as blue sky. That is not what Ken did. He did not mock, he engaged. So when his letter invited me to get together for dinner, I accepted. My motives at the time were straightforward. Surely this will be good for my research. Rosaria Butterfield, in her Christianity Today article, My Train Wreck Conversion. As a leftist lesbian professor, I despised Christians, then I somehow became one. Source, Christianity Today. Okay, so this last one here with Rosaria Butterfield. This is, once in a while you have a book that you can't put down. Her book, now this was just an article that we link you to, but she has a book called The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert, and you will not be able to put that down. And she goes from being, very extreme, lived a lesbian lifestyle, again, was a feminist. She calls herself a leftist feminist, and is in the Presbyterian Church and went to a complementarian position. And it's just a, hey, could you get that? The phone's going off there. It's fascinating. And one quote in here, Dennis, I read it to you in the pre-show that this was on every one of her syllabuses This is what she had. And she was a professor at Syracuse University in Feminist Studies. This is what the syllabus said. Students are expected to write all papers and examination essay questions from a feminist worldview or critical perspective. In Spanish class, you speak and think in Spanish. In women's studies, you speak and think in feminist paradigms. Examination essay questions written from critical perspectives outside of feminism will receive an automatic grade of F. Papers written from critical perspectives outside of feminism will be allowed one revision. Any student who is unable to write and think from a feminist critical perspective or worldview with a clear conscience should drop the class now. So how's that for open-mindedness there?
Yeah, not very open-minded.
Yeah, and the thing that struck me is that isn't this, for Christian institutions, one of the things that's leveled against Christian institutions is it's not open-minded, that it's not fair, it's not equitable. And yet in this, I mean, my word, man, she says right out, you're going to get an F.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't write from the perspective that from a feminist perspective.
And yet she was, through the love and openness of other people, is now.
Well, yeah, my interest in this book is how, could you get your phone? What's going on with your phone, Heath?
Sorry. This whole, the sequester thing, they're wanting to interview me about it and everything.
Yeah, I bet they are. My initial interest in this book is the first fifth of the book. You're going to find out how a pastor in loving response. She wrote an article, and Christians, people, the gay and lesbian community supported her and affirmed her, but on the other side, especially within the evangelical movement, she got all kinds of hate mail. And yet there was one pastor who responded in love. Yeah. And just asked her some questions. And she threw that letter away several times. But she would always, and sometimes she went to the recycle bin in her department and would dig it out because she wasn't quite sure what to do with that letter. And I think we're gonna try really hard to get her on the show because she, I think she has something to talk to us, the church, about in terms of how should the church respond and how can we speak lovingly. Yeah.
Another, oh, go ahead, Dennis.
Go ahead, Dennis.
You know who else would be a good compliment to her is Mark Yarhouse, who has done a lot of, as an evangelical, has done a lot of research and a lot of dialogue with the gay community, and has done a lot of excellent definition of helping the church understand people in that lifestyle and how they progress into it, and they're different places. We minister to people at different stages and in different ways depending on where they are in that process.
Yeah, very good. It's interesting because she really, she just lets you inside of her life to see. And what's fascinating, she says that it wasn't about sexuality for me. There was just a whole lifestyle, and it's a great read. And we'll do a follow-up with Your House, too. That sounds like a great resource.
Talking about, the church's response to people, the second story about people complaining about the noise in the church. This was in Houston, but we had a Wesleyan church in Durham, North Carolina, just went through this, where the pastor actually got a ticket for violating the noise ordinance. I believe just late last week, that everything was thrown out. But it's been interesting this morning doing research on that situation, how the neighbors have created their own website and they've put all the litigation on there, and it's just kind of a very interesting thing to see all the
my interest
pieces.
My interest in this story was because we saw this in the Wesleyan Church. Yep. We had this issue in North Carolina, but in both cases, what was the same is that the church was there first. Yeah. For Mount Calvary, they were in a bad neighborhood, had been an anchor in the community for years. The community goes down. Yep. Now it's coming back. Money's coming. People are building. They use their parking lot to refurbish their houses, have the lumber there. And the church is great. And now the new community members are complaining. Yeah. And my thing is, wait a minute. And the situation in North Carolina is that church was built out in this area before any of the houses were built. Yeah. So, it's not like you moved in and all of a sudden changed all the rules.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so Tej, I know you're excited about the new tablet HP is going to produce.
Well, I found that article that you read very interesting because they're comparing it to the Nexus 7, which is the better option. I mean, the much better option. But the reason when I heard Heath reading it right off the top is another story out from Google this week, the Chromebook Pixel. And it's the exact, so the story we're saying about HP is like, don't buy this. Why in the world would you do this? It's less money or whatever. Get this. It's a better thing. Like now the flip just turned the table around. It's just such a random, so it's not like Google gets it right every time. What in the world is that about? I mean,
yeah, it's for those that don't know, that's a computer.
It's a laptop, right, that runs a web browser, so it runs this basically Linux shell with Chrome on top of it. And it costs $1,300, and it's got 32 gigs of storage. And they say it's pretty, but there's no way I'd spend that kind of money on that extremely underpowered and pretty much useless. I mean, I guess if you solely live in Google Docs, you could do something with it. But goodness, you could live in Google Docs on a MacBook Pro with a Retina display.
I heard someone say, just get a MacBook Air and promise you'll never leave Chrome.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
It would be the equivalent.
And it's you'll have a much better capabilities of what you can do will be. So I laughed when I heard that story because there were, it's like, come on, HP, what are you doing? Because this isn't, I mean, it's not the greatest thing. It's like, why are we throwing this kind of garbage out into a marketplace where there's some really good options? Why not try to be competitive in a much different way? Are we just assuming that the consumer is ignorant, and because it has HP's name on it, that they're going to be like, oh, this must be really good. It's HP.
I actually tend to assume the opposite about HP products.
Well, maybe if someone's looking like for the cheapest thing, the $169 will grab them. But for anyone that has any kind of an inkling and an understanding, pay the $30 more and get the Nexus 7 tablet.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and don't pay the $1,300 and get the Chromebook Pixel. Pay the few $100s less and get the Hewlett Packard computer. I mean, what?
Yeah. I thought the YouVersion story was great. Here again, this makes
4 weeks in a row. YouVersion has come up on the show. We've got to get these somebody from them to talk to us. Yes,
we really do. We have to get them on the show. I loved this story, and now we're beginning to see how the whole digital age, how it's beginning to turn the tide in some places.
Yeah.
And I was shocked. I mean, I had no idea that the penetration of smartphone use was what it is in that culture, more than here in the United States.
Yeah, per capita.
Yeah. And so now this has become a very effective tool.
And think about in places where you could, I mean, there's nowhere that you could go. It may even be against the law to go to a physical store and pick up a physical Bible. You're just not going to find that. But to have access to it, wow.
Yeah. I would love to see, and maybe they do, I would love to see YouVersion partner with Wickliffe, because I know Jonathan Smoots, who went to a live Wesleyan right here in Central, they're Bible translators, and I would love to see that collaboration of, man, it's exciting to get the Bible into a new language and then get it on the YouVersion. How awesome would that be?
Cannot laud lifechurch.tv and what they're doing more. They are with everything. I mean, everything that they do, they treat it not as a resource for their lowercase c church, but they treat it as a resource for the capital C church, saying, here's something that we're not keeping it in-house. This is for the church universal. And those guys, so proud of them for that.
Couple of points in the chat room from Sumpter, who's been a missionary in Mongolia, talking about how cell phones aren't cheap, but pretty much everybody has one, and that the Mongolian Bible is available on YouVersion, but he's waiting for it to be on the Kindle. But then everybody else is saying everywhere in America, cell phones are fairly expensive for the most part, but in other parts of the world, they're like really, really cheap. I remember I had a friend went to Australia and had got an unlocked iPhone for a third of the price, and this is when iPhone just first came out. Had one unlocked, and
well, in some developing countries, what's happened is they have leapfrogged over wired communication.
Yeah.
So it's wireless that has, and so that it's the premier thing. I mean,
Right, because there
cell
are no
phones-
wires in many of these countries.
Right.
There's
No,
nothing.
that's my point. Yeah, and so that's
like the Philippines.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Greg Edmonds tells us, every Sunday at the Haitian church, everybody comes in and plugs their phones in because they don't have electricity at home,
That's
but
right.
they have a cell phone.
The church serves people in that way. It's a service to the community to say today do this. And one of the things I wanted to do that I asked him about was, could we go to the church and build that out? Because right now it's like these just like 4 outlets. Or how cool to like just row and row after of surge protectors to just build that with a little shelf up there all around the church. But anyways,
our charging ministry.
Yeah. What was I going to say? I can't remember. Oh, it was good too.
Okay, so
what were we talking about?
You can't remember. Let me say this. This whole story about YouVersion gets on a topic that we have had before on this show, and that is there's this company out here that has this Bible software, and it is a business model, and they are out to make money off of it. And what
a company that we won't name might
won't.
start with a L and Ogos, but
and now contrast that. With YouVersion.
Yeah.
I mean, they really see this as a kingdom resource.
Yeah.
And I was reading something yesterday where someone was really taking pot shots at the mega church movement. But one of the things that we have seen, like with 12 Stone, I mean, this church is 12,000. Their whole thing is that if we can create something, you cannot buy it from us, but we'll give it to you.
Yeah.
We'll resource you because we feel like God has gifted us with this. It is not our resource to sell. It is for the benefit of His kingdom.
Yeah, I wish a lot of churches like 12 Stone were a bit more aggressive on that, like Life Churches. I mean, Life Church is loudly proclaiming, here's this.
Right, and it's for
Come and use it. Yeah. It's for the church, capital C. Yeah.
And YouVersion, this is just another great example of how they have entered into Bible translation, and what a tool.
Yeah, the tool I'm dying for, and they've got, Life Church does a little bit with this, but a church management software that's built into the cloud.
Desperately
it's
needed.
So expensive right now. The people who are selling that, it is so expensive. Yeah. I guess a larger church can use that, but for a church of 100 to 200, man, it's out of budget to be able to do church management where you like right now we have it set up in the church where you have to go to the church office and sit at that church office computer to do all of that. And what if my Sunday school teachers could take attendance in their classroom by pulling out their phone, having a login for that, and putting, here's who's here, and it all just gets sent instead of our Sunday school superintendent have to go around, and get the little pieces of paper and do all of that. I need that, and nobody has that for free. Not that I wouldn't give something for it. I certainly would. But, man, it's too stinking expensive right now.
Yeah, and we're not just grabbing for free resources. The point is this, that there are two absolutely contrary mindsets that you see in these two approaches to resources. And I just applaud, YouVersion and what they're doing. All righty here. Let's talk a little bit about what's...
I just remembered what I was going to say.
The thought came. Go ahead.
Do you remember a story from very early on when we were doing this show? You were talking about how in countries where wireless has leaped wired connections. Do you remember the story about the 100 megabyte file being transferred over the internet connection in the carrier pigeon?
Yes,
do you remember that story?
Oh my word!
They tied a flash drive to a carrier pigeon, and it had to go like 100 megabytes in 100 miles, and see who could get the data there first, quicker. The pigeon or the internet connection, and the pigeon won. That's true wireless communication right there.
Old-fashioned wireless. My word, we probably did that in the first 3 months.
Oh, it was, and that came to mind. Okay.
Yeah. All right, hey, let's talk about what's coming up here in the future. Next week in studio, we have Dr. Roger McKenzie going to talk to us about recreational discipleship. On March the 12th, we have a pre-recorded interview with Zach Woodfin. He is the assistant conditioning and strength coach for the Green Bay Packers, and that was a great interview. So it's already done. We have it recorded, and wonderful to be with him. On March the 19th, we have Russ Gonzalez. He'll be joining us via Skype. He works at our denominational headquarters. He'll be talking to us about issues of education just throughout our denomination and some of the challenges that they face and some of the initiatives that they have undertaken at our general headquarters. All right. Again, Dennis, we want to thank you for being with us today. Maybe once again, tell our listeners where they can get a hold of you.
DennisHumphrey.com, or that'll be the simplest way. You'll find my email or phone number there.
All right. Brother Heath.
HeathMulligan.com, Heath Mulligan everywhere.
You can find me at MatthewTG.com, where I am working hard to build AnthonyCasey.com.
All right, and you can find me at Twitter at AKC64. If you want to
get with the program, why are you so far behind? Where's your URL, Tony?
You need to be AKC64.com.
Okay. I'll pray about that. Listen, if you want to do further research on anything we discussed today, you can find all the links to the stories we covered at our website, thetechnologyshow.com. If you want to contact us, send your emails to thetechnologyshow@gmail.com, or better yet, if you just call 3049 Theology, you can leave a voicemail there for us. You will make TG's day. That's 304-986-5649. Leave that message. We may even play your comments,
questions, suggestions for the show, your thoughts, whatever. Do it.
Love to have you do that. As always, thanks for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Adios.
Bye-bye.